Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. On this show, you'll learn how to write and publish a book that grows your impact, income, and business, all from people who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the owner of selfpublishing.com, and a host of another podcast called the 7-Figure Principles Podcast. For free training on how to get your book published, go to spsfreetraining.com. Let's dive in with today's episode. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and the Self-Publishing School podcast is back. I'm back, like James Brown. In all seriousness, though, the Self-Publishing School podcast is back, and we're super excited that you're here listening to this episode. Now, maybe you're listening to this episode as part of the launch, and you're excited about it, or maybe you're seeing this episode because you've stumbled onto the Self-Publishing School podcast, and you're just curious, like, what is this all about? What's the podcast about? What is this going to look like? What can I expect listening to this show? So this will be a very brief episode, just a few minutes, just setting the stage on what you can expect here, the Self-Publishing School podcast. So this podcast is all about how to write and publish books and use those books to grow your income, your impact, and your business. So that's what we're going to be talking about. All right. That's the North Star for this show. We believe that books change lives. We believe that books change lives, not only of the author, but of the reader. Right? A book is a $15 mentor that has the ability to change people's lives. And maybe you've heard me talk about the concept of leveraged impact. It's something I'm super passionate about. Maybe you've seen me talk about this in my TEDx talk. I talk about this concept of leveraged impact, but just the ability to encapsulate what you've learned and your life experience into a book and then use that book to help a huge and massive amount of people, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people. So I'm super passionate about books, if you can't tell. And this show is all about helping people write more books. Now, we've got a companion to this podcast. It's the Self-Publishing School YouTube channel. Every podcast that is published on this podcast here is also on the YouTube channel. So if you're looking for the video version of podcast, or there's a bunch of other video content on there that's obviously not on the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You're going to find that really helpful. I know some people might find the YouTube videos way more engaging because you can actually see the people that I'm interviewing. This is going to be a once a week podcast. So every week it'll be about a 45-minute episode. I'll try to max out at 45 minutes per episode. The world doesn't need another 15 bajillion hour podcast. I want to be respectful of your time. I think there's certainly some people that do that well, but most podcasts are too long, in my opinion, so that's not what this is. If you've seen my 7-Figure Principles podcast, those episodes are super short. So that's 5 to 25 minutes, and it's just me teaching. So if you're a leader or entrepreneur or someone growing a company, like, that podcast is awesome. Check out the 7-Figure Principles podcast. This is going to be a different format. So for the most part, I'll be interviewing people. So this will be interview style, 30 to 50 minute interviews, where I'll be interviewing people who have actually done what you want to do, right? Which is writing and publishing books, and in most cases, using that book to grow their business. Now, this is going to definitely skew nonfiction, and it's going to skew, using a book to grow your business. That will predominantly be what we talk about. If you're looking for a really great fiction podcast, this is not it, although a lot of the fundamental marketing principles will apply. But that's the lens with which we'll go in here. And, the launch is obviously coming up at the time of recording this podcast interview and this coming out. So this episode is being released on April 20th, and then April 22nd will be the first episode. So we've got John Gordon, and then the week after that, we've got Russell Brunson, and there's some other episodes in the pipeline. We got Ruth Sukup, Pat Flynn, Joey Coleman, Michael Hyatt, a bunch of other people. So I'm just super excited. But these are all folks, again, who have done this. So I'll be asking from experience. This is not a tell me your life story kind of podcast. It's let's get practically. What are you doing to launch this book, to use this book to grow your business, to write this book, things like that. So my goal here is that in this podcast, you're going to kind of get to see the behind the scenes of the most successful books on the planet and the most successful authors on the planet and the people who are doing it the right way, whether it's self-published, traditionally published, anything like that. We're going to dive into it. So that's what this podcast is all about. Now we're going to be releasing episodes every single Wednesday. So SPS Wednesdays, be sure to tune in, set it on your calendar, and most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. So subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. And then obviously, I would love for you to leave a review. Those are really, really helpful. Just like if you're an author, you know that reviews are the lifeblood of your book. Reviews are the lifeblood of this podcast. So it would mean the world to me if you left a review on the podcast and subscribed. That way you don't miss an episode. So we've got so many action-packed episodes coming up for you, and I'd love to hear from you. So if you leave a review, in that review, let me know who you'd like to see on the podcast. Kind of a fun little way to crowdsource some guests. And no guest is too big or too small, and it could be anyone. So when you leave a review, let me know who you want to see on the podcast. I'd love to see that, and I'll do my best if there's some momentum around that person to bring them on. So welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. I'm super excited to have you here. We've obviously got all sorts of other resources on the Self-Publishing School blog. We've got book outline template generators. We've got all kinds of stuff that will shortcut the process of getting your book done and of doing it successfully. So definitely check out it's a big blog post on how to write a book on the Self-Publishing School blog, and a bunch of other helpful tools, resources, webinars, trainings, free books, all that kind of stuff. We've got live events, the Author Advantage Live. Maybe we'll see you there in 2020 or at any of the other future events. But we got a bunch of resources. We want to support you however we can. But obviously a big first step is this podcast. So I hope that you enjoy the podcast. Dive into the first episode right now. Go and subscribe. Leave a review if you like it, and I'll see you in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. If you're looking for next steps and help with your book, here are 2 things that'll be helpful to do right now. Number 1, go to spsfreetraining.com. We've got some awesome training right there. It's going to help you get started with your book, write your book, launch your book, publish your book successfully, and use that book to get leads, sales, and referrals for your business. So that's the first thing, spsfreetraining.com. When you register for that training, you also get a free copy of my book published. Now, the second thing is if you're serious about this book and you're just ready to get started, book a call with my team at Self-Publishing School at selfpublishingschool.com/apply. Okay, so selfpublishingschool.com/apply. We'll talk with you about your goals for your book, your challenges with your book, next steps. How do you get this thing published? So number 1, for free training, go to spsfreetraining.com, or to book a call with the team, go to selfpublishingschool.com/apply. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there are so many podcasts that you could be listening to, so I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this one. Now, I want you to do 2 things right now. Number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've actually got a YouTube channel with all of the podcast episodes in video form. On that channel, it's the Self-Publishing School YouTube channel, as well as a ton of other helpful videos around writing and publishing a book successfully. So check out the YouTube channel, subscribe to that channel. And then number 2, subscribe to the podcast here, so the Self-Publishing School podcast, and leave a review. So do that seriously right now. It's so helpful. It'll make sure you don't miss an episode in the future. So subscribe, leave a review, seriously, right now. Yep, do it right now. Hey, and I also host the 7-Figure Principles podcast. If you'd like to check that out, great podcast around scaling a company. So whether you're a leader or entrepreneur, you might like that. But thanks again, and I will see you in the next episode.